Disclaimer: these stories will contain graphic depictions of horror elements, including but not limited to gore, graphic depictions of violence, body horror, murder, just all the horror. So please exercise caution when listening. Good evening. Welcome to Sniper's Creepy Crypt, the spookiest place in the here and there, the place between where you're coming from and where you might never leave. I am Sniper Shadow, and I am here in this our month of the horror and macabre to bring you tales of the utmost terrifying. These tales are not my own. I simply overhear them from passers-by. Sniper's Creepy Crypt is open for 31 days and 31 days only, before it disappears for another year. So join us for some horror from the depths of the hell dimensions.
I have been receiving the letters for well over 50 years, although now it's more often I will get an email from him. Usually threatening, sometimes cordial or boastful, occasionally almost begging me to return to the small town of Fairview. After a few years they started, he began to claim to have found the little girl and described in vivid detail how he tore her to shreds. I was worried he may have been telling the truth for over a decade, until I managed to track her down in the summer of 71 and discovered she had grown into a lovely young woman residing in Kingsport. When I informed him of her safety in one of my rare replies to him, he responded with a 59-page-long diatribe about how he was going to torture me to death. Now, after all these years, I feel I should return for one final hunt in a career in the supernatural. It would be fitting that Fairview would be the location of my first and last encounter with the paranormal. But I am getting rather ahead of myself. In the summer of 54, I had just graduated from high school and decided to take a small vacation on my own. Having never been one for large crowds, I settled on the small town of Fairview, which I had heard had some of the most stirring natural landscapes in the state, especially the lush forests that surrounded it on every side. I had scheduled a 2-week stay at the Fairview Coyote Inn, and left that morning to enjoy the scenic drive through the countryside. When I finally arrived in town, it was almost evening, but I still took time to stop at the town limits and admire the famous sign, which had become somewhat obscure legend surrounding the area. The version I had heard from a schoolmate said that it had been stolen from the local, now bankrupt and closed zoo by a gang of vandals during the First World War, and erected in its current position for reasons only a heavily inebriated mind could fathom. The zoo owner apparently never bothered to retrieve it, and so it stood until no one could imagine the town without it. It read, 1. Animals may not leave their habitat. 2. Animals who harm visitors or staff will be punished. 3. Do not, under any circumstances, feed the animals. Having satisfied my curiosity, I drove to the hotel and checked in. The owner was extremely friendly and asked if, since the porter was homesick that day, I might go into the next room and ask the maintenance man, whom he had affectionately called Old Ralph, to help me with my bags. Old Ralph was a large man, only slightly taller than average. His waist was extremely robust and his arms were well muscled. He had white hair and a long, extremely shaggy beard. I politely asked for his assistance, and he grudgingly and silently stood and walked to the lobby to help with my bags. Simply trying to make conversation on the way to my room, I remarked on the picture of a coyote in the inn's logo. He replied through clenched teeth, "It's no damn coyote, you." After which he trailed off into mumbling. He unceremoniously dumped my belongings outside my door and left without a word. I, tired from my trip, simply moved my belongings inside and went to sleep. The next day I spent my time in the town and explored the woods. It was utterly remarkable how polite and friendly every person I met was. Every single one was incredibly happy to help me in any way. One man, upon being asked directions to a place which happened to be across town, happily walked me the entire distance. I thought it was unusual, but hardly alarming. Actually found I enjoyed myself in their company. When I returned for the evening, I met the family who had moved into the room next to mine. After a pleasant chat, I turned into my room and settled in to watch television. Unfortunately, the set suddenly stopped working, and I went to fetch the repairman. The clerk in the lobby happily went to find him when I asked for him, and I was told to return to my room. Some few minutes later, old Ralph knocked on my door and asked, extremely irritated, "Yeah, what's the problem you got that's so bad you need to wake me up for?" I pointed to the television, and before I could utter a word, he strode over to it, knocked its side with the back of his hand, and it turned on. "Works just fine, you idiot." And then he left before I could reply. A few seconds after him leaving, I heard him bump into someone and begin cursing loudly. I peered outside and saw him berating Mr. Jackson from the next room. Ralph was absolutely livid, practically foaming at the mouth while hurling insults and curses at him. Jackson looked angry, while his wife and their child stood in the doorway afraid. I saw that the clerk looked entirely nonplussed, bearing an expression as if to say, "Oh well, best to just ignore it and ride it out." Ralph ranted for a full 5 minutes, until Jackson demanded that he stop doing this in front of his daughter. Ralph, with a new mean glint in his eye, said something deeply racist and unsettling. Jackson, shaking with rage, punched old Ralph square on the jaw. I was shocked both by the display of violence, but also by Ralph's reaction. He looked like he had just won the lottery. Grinning from ear to ear and laughing like a madman, he merely walked away without another word. I, confused beyond reason, simply wanting to distance myself from the situation, returned to my room and spent the night normally until it was time to sleep. That night I was awoken by sounds from the next room. It sounded as if someone were beating on the door. This lasted a few seconds before being replaced by the sound of a wooden door splintering and human screams. I rushed out of bed and to the next door. I saw a large, brown, hairy creature hunched over the dismembered torso of Mr. Jackson, while his wife tried to beat the creature away with the room's lamp. The creature, approximately the size of a gorilla, but with a canine head, most closely resembling that of a hyena, ignored her and continued feasting on Mr. Jackson's limbs. I would like to say that I bravely charged in and fought off the beast, but reacted how most people would, by standing paralyzed by fear, trying to rationalize it in some way as some bizarre nightmare. After finishing Jackson, it turned its attention to his wife, who was by now hysterically beating at it with the remains of the lamp. I watched as it ate her, bit by bit, starting with her legs, then her arms, finally her torso and head. It was only when it looked up and began to slowly creep towards the corner of the room the girl was crying in, as if savoring the terror it was inflicting on her, that I sprang into action. I jumped in its way just as it was reaching for her, causing it to swat me aside. I was launched across the room and was sure I would see it killing her when I looked up. Instead, the creature was staring at me with what can only be described as abject terror. No. No. It pleaded in old Ralph's raspy voice. Then it doubled over, clutching its stomach. It began vomiting up blood and the remains of the 2 people it had just ingested. Taking the opportunity, I grabbed the girl in my arms and ran back to my room, locking and barring the door. I could hear it screaming after a few minutes. "Not fair. You got in my way. You interfered. That shouldn't count. Should count!" After an hour of the screaming from the next room, the sound suddenly stopped. After a few more hours, exhaustion overcame my fear and I must have fallen asleep. Some time later, I woke up to 2 glowing yellow eyes just in front of my face. I screamed as loud as I could, but knew I had nowhere to run. Soon I realized it wasn't moving. It was just staring at me. I collected myself as best as I was able and noticed the door had not been broken. It had been opened normally, and the cabinet had been pushed aside. The monster calmly spoke to me. "Better start fighting back, or I'll kill you and that girl." Pausing for a moment to give me some chance to respond, he continued, "Come on, I'm sure you can do it. I'm just an animal after all, right? Big strong human like you can kill me. Just pick up something heavy and bash my skull in. What's the matter? You scared?" I remained mute, praying there was some way I could get away from this horrible thing crouched over me. Do you know how hard it is living here? Not one single person in this whole fucking town will touch me. Not when I insult them, smash their windows, or tear someone apart in the middle of the street. They don't even notice me. But yous tourists, yous are different. Yous got fight in you. Come on, do it. I said do it! Fight! Fight me now! With that, it raised its claws to swipe at me, but before it could, it collapsed once again, making a hacking sound like a man trying to vomit on an empty stomach. I took the opportunity to run to my car and drive away with the girl. Knowing no one would believe my story, I left the girl at a police station at a nearby town and told her to tell them she didn't know where her parents were. I told my parents that I had been very ill and had decided to cancel my vacation after 2 days. I thought I was finally safe and spent the next few days feigning illness. It was about a week later when the first letter arrived. It was from old Ralph, who told me in plain terms and colorful language that he was going to hunt me down and kill me, so that I should try to find him before he could find me. I confess, I was frightened, but I reasoned that if he could come for me, he wouldn't have sent a letter instead of coming for himself. That he had spent the last half of the century harassing the one who got away, as he calls me, attests that my guess was correct. I think, after I have passed on all my knowledge of the supernatural to able apprentices, I'll make my last foray into Fairview. It'll be one final mission, after which I will either be retired or dead. I think the world as a whole should be safer either way. I know you're probably reading this. God knows you stalk me online enough to make up for your inability to do so in reality. But even if I do die, an animal like you isn't allowed to leave his habitat. Right, Ralph?
That concludes our tale for today. Return tomorrow for another horror-filled experience. Wherever you come from and wherever you're going, thank you for spending some time here with us at Sniper's Creepy Crypt. Remember, traveler, eyes ahead, don't look back. Until next time, good night and good luck.